that were written after David, looking back on David, and how they helped us to understand, as we start at the beginning of David's life, we don't know a lot of things. But you can look at these verses and learn that David walked in truth, walked in righteousness, uprightness of heart, walked in integrity of heart, walked in uprightness. His heart was wholly devoted to the Lord his God. David did what was right in the sight of God. Those descriptions of David are the things I know we all want to be described that way. We want to be that kind of a person. And yet David was singled out as being a man after God's own heart. And we have more information about David and from David than just about anybody in the Bible. And so we're really trying to think about what it means to be a man after God's own heart. Knowing good and well, all of us do in our own hearts, between us and the Lord, knowing good and well that Satan is constantly tempting us and making it difficult to be right. And so David also faced challenges, and he didn't pass them all. He failed some of those, but then how did he respond to those? We're going to learn a lot of things about that as well. We looked last week at the story, the introduction really of David coming on the scene in the Battle of Goliath, and how when he saw what Goliath was saying, it just offended him something awful. And the things he said were things like this: "For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" The living God. Who is this Philistine saying things about the living God? In verse 37, this I didn't mention in 1 Samuel chapter 17. In verse 37, David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Verse 45, "I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." In verse 46, "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand." Verse 46 again, "That all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with the sword and the spear, for the battle is the Lord's." He comes into this, people are completely intimidated and scared and frozen. And it just is obvious to him. This isn't right. This isn't okay. Who's this Philistine? The Lord has blessed me to be able to defeat a lion and a bear. He'll bless me to take this guy down. And he tells the Goliath, "I'm coming in the name of the Lord of hosts, that all the earth will know there's a God in Israel, and that all of these people here will know that the Lord doesn't deliver with a sword or spear. The battle is the Lord's." He just has such a clarity about this situation, such a confidence, such a faith. It's not complicated to him. He just acts. His faith that God will help us defeat this. He will. And he goes and does it. And we're not going to revisit that whole story, but I do think that we see him in his true light in that particular event, because that's the way David's going to live his life. That's the way David is told. We're told about David. He believes. He has. When we looked at our Wednesday night class and our study about faith, without faith, it's impossible to please God. But you must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those that seek him. That's David. That's a heart after God, a heart after God. He believed that God was there, and he believed that he would bless him and reward those that seek him. That's who his heart was. We know that's what our hearts needs to be. And David did boast. David was a boaster, but not about himself. he took great pride in boasting about God. And we know that we're told that. Paul told us, let him who boasts, boast in the Lord. We've got all the same reasons that we might want to be so confident to say things with pride about our God. That kind of heart that takes pride. I've enjoyed sometimes in Bible classes when we were talking about glorifying God, but starting off a class by saying, tell me about somebody in your life that's your hero. And for people to talk about their mom or their dad or whoever it is, at the drop of a hat, whoever that person is in your life, you got something to say. Okay, if you're giving me the green light, let me tell you about them. I got things that I'd love to tell you. That's who David's heart was about God. He was just so faithful and so courageous and confident in God. That's who he was. And so we see that evidenced in what we've already studied so far. Okay, I'm going to ask you to bear with me for a second. I want to tell you something a little bit off topic, but it's actually not to me. It's very relevant. Back in, I don't know, it was late 1980s, Dee Bowman came to the church we worshiped at in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I know a lot of you know who Dee Bowman was. But he read to us this verse in Ephesians 5. See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. And as Brother Bowman read that passage and he said, walk circumspectly, I recognized it right off. I don't quite know what that word means. I'm pretty sure he was using the New King James Version. And walk circumspectly. If we look, if you happen to use a New American Standard, it says be careful. But the more literal translation is in the ESV, where it says look carefully. Circumspectly. You see a root word in there, spect, and we would know that word from spectacles. It has to do with looking and what you see. The definition of blepo is to see, to look at, to behold, to perceive. So I was pretty happy after he read that verse, and I didn't quite know what that word meant, for him to then say, our lesson tonight is going to be about walking circumspectly. And those of you that have ever been around Dee a little bit, you know he can make an awesome lesson out of one word. And that's what he did, and I remember it very well to this day. Because he talked about being circumspect, looking, paying attention, and looking. And he talked about how what you see depends a lot on where you're looking from. He talked about perspective. And that same root word is in there, perspective. Your perspective really determines an awful lot about what you see. How you look at things will determine what you see. And I have a feeling that this is a great deal of what God is talking about when he's talking about David's heart. That the way David looked at things, what David saw, David's perspective about himself, and the way David saw himself, and the way he saw others, the way David saw his role, the way he perceived what God wanted him to do, was exactly the way it's supposed to be. And I think that that's really what you and I are struggling with all the time. because Satan's constantly trying to deceive us into seeing things wrong. Our perspective about things determines how we feel about ourselves, what we think about ourselves. Our perspective and the way we see things shapes what we think about other people. Our perspective and the way we see things really shades how we interpret our circumstances. And when we're suffering and when we're blessed and all those things that are happening in our lives and people that are in our lives and our own actions in our lives, we see them based on how we look at them, where we're coming from in our mind. And the psychology, for the most part, is trying to help us understand what we're thinking, why we're thinking what we're thinking. And it's funny how much of psychology goes back to our childhood. When we learn to think, when that's when sort of our perceptions are formed about ourselves and where we are in the world. And that's why parents have such an important role about forming children, to not teach them that they're the most important thing in the world, to teach them what it means to be humble and all the things that we want to teach our children. That's important to do it when they're children, because that's what everybody winds up doing in their adulthood. Is if they're having troubles, they're trying to figure out, why am I having troubles? What's going through my mind? And there's all kinds of books and psychologists and everything trying to help us understand, why are you thinking what you're thinking? What you're thinking is not accurate. Let's talk. Why are you thinking it that way? And the truth of it is, all the psychiatrists and psychologists and the books and all of that, all the answers are here about how to think, about how we should think, how we should perceive the world around us, how we should perceive our place in God's creation. It's all described here. Now, if we study it enough, we're in it enough, little at a time, we'll pick up on things and realize, that's not the way I was thinking. I was wrong. I've been wrong about something. I need to change. I need to work on that. And then we all will know how hard it is to be working on that. Saying all that to say, as we go through this study of David and his heart, it seems to me that's the most amazing thing about him, is he just seems to, his perspective about himself and about what God wants out of him just seems to be on point. He understands who he is and what his role is, and he doesn't put himself ahead of God's plans. He fails sometimes, but that's a different thing. So I wanted to start with that, walking circumspectly, knowing that our perspective and the way we see things affects the way we behave and what we do. And I guess I'm already telling you ahead of time that David's perspective and the way he thinks is on point. But I want us today to think about David and compare him a little bit to Saul. So David's coming in now to the scene after having defeated Goliath. And we're going to see some things happening in David's life, and then we're going to see some reactions out of Saul. And I want us to think about that. Why is Saul reacting the way he's reacting? What's different about Saul's heart than David's heart? So with all that said, in chapter 18, as soon as, in verse 1, as soon as they had finished talking about Goliath, Saul, the son of Jonathan, was knit to the soul of David. And so that's, right off the bat, just notice this. David's a young man, and now he's accomplished this heroic feat, and he's going to become incredibly famous. But right out the gate, he gets a friend who will wind up being very critical to him to have this intimate friend in Jonathan. So he has this friend. And then in verse 2, Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. So he's not a shepherd anymore. That's who he's been. That's where he's formed. He doesn't get to go back home and be a shepherd anymore. Now he's in Saul's court. And in verse 5, and David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So he was successful everywhere that Saul sent him. And that was good in the sight of the people and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So this young guy who's accomplished this unbelievable heroic event is now being promoted into a place of authority, and the people are loving it. And even Saul's other servants are loving it. They're always having a problem with David being in that position. And then in verse 7, I kind of picture this as maybe the ticker tape parade or the victory tour or whatever. The women sang to one another as they celebrated. Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. So that's a popularity. You know, he's got a friend, and he's got a position and respect, and now he's being celebrated. He's a celebrity, really. He's a young man, though. But he's being celebrated. He's really being put on a pedestal as a great man, and he's getting a lot of attention. And now we've seen a lot of examples of young people in our society making it big and being everywhere, and everything looks great, and it's not many years later where they have completely self-imploded because they couldn't handle that. It's just too much freedom, too much power, and it gets out of the control. That's not going to happen in David's young life. But look in verse 13. I'm just going to read through some of the things that are happening to David at this point. Saul made him a commander of 1,000, and he went in and out before the people. And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. In verse 16, but all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. And I think if we could picture that going out and coming in, picture David leading columns of men out of the city to go to war, to do the king's bidding, and then coming back victorious, and then doing it again, and coming back victorious. And it doesn't take long for it to start catching on, his reputation to start growing, and people to start thinking, David is awesome. And all of Israel and Judah loved David. And verse 14 said that because the Lord was with him. I don't want to imagine that we can really, I don't guess we have enough information to really understand how this situation was for David. But he's not home anymore. He's part of the king's court. He's being blessed by the Lord. Everything he touches is going right. He's famous. I mean, I got to tell you, I think it's pretty much everything that a young 20-year-old man could hope for. I mean, it's exactly what it's awesome. And the king wants to give David his daughter, but in verse 18, David said to Saul, "Who am I, and who are my relatives, my father's clan in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king?" You wouldn't be surprised if he accepted that honor, because he's getting honor. That's all he's getting. He's getting honor, honor, honor. But he doesn't feel that way. He says, who am I? I shouldn't be the son-in-law to the king. Who am I? Who are my people? He didn't feel entitled to that at all. Then in verse 30, the commanders of the Philistines came out to battle, and as often as they came out, David had more success than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was highly esteemed. David did eventually get David's second daughter as his wife, and we learn in chapter 19 that he has a house. In verse 8, and there was war again, and David went out and fought with the Philistines and struck them with a great blow so that they fled before him. David is just, if you were a casual observer, you would say, this is the hero of Israel. Everything is going great. The king is honoring him. He's best friends with the king's son. He's married to the king's daughter. And he's a hero. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to imagine that. But now let's go back to the first verse of chapter 18. As all of that was happening, and when the ladies were singing David's praise in verse 7, in verse 8, and Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom? And David eyed David from that day on. So while everything and everybody seems to love David, the king is not happy about it. He's not happy about it. He eyes David from that day on. And we know how Saul was struggling with an evil spirit, and David had been brought in because he was such an exceptional musician that he could calm Saul by playing his music. And in verse 10, he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre. And as he did this by day, Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David evaded him. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. Y'all, this has got to be hard on this young man. To be such a celebrity and have such respect, but the king himself is got his eye on him and snaps when he's playing and throws a spear at him. That's got to be a hard thing to get your arms around if you're David. What have I done? What am I doing wrong here? I'm doing everything you asked me to do, and it's going great. What are you mad at me about? In verse 15, and when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. In verse 17, Saul said, let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. He really wanted to give David his daughter so that she'd be a distraction to him, and when he went out one of these times, he wouldn't come back. Pretty evil thought. Verse 25, again, now Saul thought to make David fall by the hands of the Philistines. Verse 28, but when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, the Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. And so now in chapter 19 and verse 1, Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. Man, this is ugly. This is just the ugliest thing you can imagine. David's done nothing but what the king should want out of him. But he's so upset about it that he progresses to the point of trying to tell his son, David's friend, and his other servants to kill David. In verse 10, after there's a bit of a a reconciliation temporarily. In verse 10, 19, Saul sought to pin David to the, well, it was right after, again, David went out and did so well. And Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded Saul so that he struck the spear with the wall. And David fled and escaped that night. He had to escape from Saul, and he went home, and Saul sends men to get him, and his wife has to let him out a window and fabricate a story so that Saul's men can't get him and kill him. And then when Saul challenges her, why did you do that? She throws David under the bus and says, he said he was going to kill me if I didn't do it. So now David's had this unbelievable event. It's promoted him into this unbelievable situation, and everything he's doing is turning out right. But now the king has turned on him. He's trying to kill him. And David has to flee from him. And then he has to flee from his home. He loses his house. He loses his wife. And we're going to stop there, but that's where we'll pick up with David next week. He has to leave. He has to leave the situation that seems like it would be just what God wanted. You've shown faithfulness. You've done well, and I'm blessing you. I'm with you. But Saul runs him out of town. And we're going to spend some time in David's mind while David has to spend what I think is many years as a fugitive, even though he's been told he's the next king. And it seemed like it was going exactly like it was supposed to. And now he's going to live as a fugitive. The difficulty for David to understand why is this happening? What have I done? Is really significant. And the neat thing about it is when a lot of those things are happening, David's writing. He's writing about it. And so we're going to get to look at that and understand how he thinks and feels in that situation. But my question for us right now is, why is Saul being like that? How did Saul get like that? Jealousy. Jealousy is definitely the result of it. He's jealous. Pride, control. It says repeatedly that he's afraid of David. What's he got to be afraid of? Okay, he sees that the Lord is with him, and he already knows that the Lord is not with him, with Saul anymore. And he realizes that the Lord is with him. He's going to take my kingdom. He's going to run the place. And he's terrified about it. Very good. He's so focused on David and the threat that David is to his situation that he can't see that this is what the Lord wants. Let's go back in time. Let's rewind our clocks a little bit. And we really haven't studied this, and we're not going to try to delve into it too deeply now, but what do we know happened in Saul's life before this, before the Goliath incident? Okay, and we had a good lesson about that Sunday, one event where Saul had been anointed to be the king. And when we first meet Saul, he's hiding in the baggage. And I think that's our first hint. He's hiding. And that's kind of a weird behavior. He's hiding. He doesn't come out. He's not accepting this position with a lot of enthusiasm. But he's anointed. And he does well in the beginning. But it's not very long before he becomes disobedient. And we could go through a bunch of verses, and we won't do that to any degree, but Steve led us through a good lesson Sunday where he talked about, this is before that. So the Philistines came to fight in chapter 13, and Samuel was supposed to come and offer the burnt offerings within 7 days, I believe it was. And he didn't get there in time. And Saul panics. And he does it himself. And when he's asked about it, he said, I saw that the people were scattering from me. The Philistines are here, and they're coming any minute. And you're not here, and the people are getting antsy, and I'm losing them. And so I forced myself to offer the burnt offerings. And it just sounds like we can just interpret from what he's saying that he feels responsible for leading these people, and he needs the Lord's blessing, but you're not here to do it the right way, so I had to, you put me in a bad spot, I had to do it. And I think he probably believed that. He probably believed that he was sort of a victim here. He got backed into an untenable situation. But Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God with which he commanded you. Your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. So Saul getting impatient about Samuel coming to offer the sacrifices and being afraid that the people were going to flee from him and that the Philistines were going to come on him, and him deciding, well, then I'm going to do something I'm not supposed to do in order to keep control of things. That was the thing that made God say, I'm looking for somebody that's after my own heart. While Saul may have thought that his rationale, the way he saw the situation, the way he was looking at things, he may have thought that he was doing the right thing. He was doing what he had to do. The Lord said, no, you're not my guy. If you can come to that conclusion, I'm looking for somebody whose heart is completely mine and yours is not. And so we sought after a man after his own heart. Jack? Yeah. Yeah. So that was the part of our lesson Sunday, was about him not doing what he was told to do and wiping out the Amalekites. And God said, I regret that I have made King Saul, for he has turned back from following me and has not performed my commandments. But Saul thought that he had. I've messed up my notes here. They're not where they're supposed to be. That's somebody else's fault. Huh. That's weird. I've just got things jumbled up on here. Well, anyway, Saul did not do what he was. Yeah, there they are. Sorry. Saul said, they have brought the Amalekites. He says, I have done what I was told to do. That's so weird. I've got this really messed up. They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen. And Samuel said, stop. Let me tell you what the Lord said. And Saul says, speak. And Samuel said, though you are little in your own eyes, are you not head of the tribes of Israel? the Lord anointed you king over Israel, and the Lord sent you on a mission and said, go devote to destruction the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed? Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? And Samuel said, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. I have gone on the mission which the Lord sent me, and I have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and I have devoted the Amalekites to destruction, but the people took the spoil. And I'm going to skip to the end of it where he becomes convinced, because he finally says in verse 30, I have sinned. In verse 24, I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. So from Saul's perspective, in the situation that was occurring, I guess what happened was the people got there and saw these great spoils. And let's think about it, if it was us, if we're supposed to be carrying this message out and destroying everything, but we come across a pallet of cash, and we're supposed to burn it, and surely we don't have to burn this. Let's take the good stuff. We'll take that back with us. Well, they convinced themselves of that. But Saul went along with it. He was afraid. He admits, I was afraid. If he had said no, he was afraid of what would have happened, that they would have turned on him. And really, this turns out being his big problem. He feels like he's the one who has to be the leader. And he's afraid when they start to scatter. And he's afraid of what they might do if he makes a decision they don't like. His perspective about his position was that it was him, that he was the king that had to lead these people, and he had to prove himself to the people and do the things that made the people happy so that they would comply with him. He did not see his position as being the anointed by God to do God's will. And if I have faith in him and do what he wants, it'll turn out the way he wants it to. He did not see it that way. He put it on himself too much. The way he saw things polluted his decisions, and he made decisions based on his error in the way he thought about himself. That's not the kind of decisions. That's not the way David, it's not the way his mind worked. What he saw was, I'm here to do what the Lord wants me to do, the end. And so he didn't question it. He just did things that the Lord said. David. Yeah. 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 David was committed ahead of time to do whatever the Lord said to do. He didn't have to think about it. Saul was questioning everything. Saul was insecure. Saul felt like he had to prove something for the people to follow him. He just was insecure in his position. He's hiding. He wants to be hiding in the baggage, but he's up there now trying to be a leader, and he's doing a terrible job of it. Yeah. On the way over this morning, Jennifer said, "You excited for class?" I told her that I'm not as much as I have been. And it was because I've got too much stuff, and I never did really settle in on, it just never fell into place, and I'm always nervous when I don't know exactly where I'm going, that I'm going to not do as well. And as I explained to her, I said, it's so funny I'm saying that, because that's something Saul would say. That's what the way Saul would feel. Saul would think, hey, I'm the teacher. I got to do a good job. I got to have my ducks in a row. And if I don't have my ducks in a row, then I might lose the audience and I might not accomplish what I wanted to. That's me. That sounded like Saul. I've got the Bible here. I've got a Bible lesson. I may or may not do it great, but David would just say, what are you talking about? Just do it. Just teach. It doesn't matter how you look. It doesn't matter if you look good or not. If you've got your ducks in a row and you do a great job, it doesn't matter. Just teach it. It's the Lord's word. And y'all, I think, as I said that to her, I thought, man, I think I've gone through this whole thing sort of picking at Saul and seeing how his perspective ruined his way of seeing himself and his role. And I see David's perspective, and that's the way we ought to be, and that's the way I think subconsciously, I think that's the way I am. And then I caught myself talking just like Saul. And maybe every one of us are struggling with our perspective. And so we see things the wrong way, and we don't even realize when we're not being faithful. We're not being confident in God. We're not just trusting Him. We're thinking about ourselves too much. And the Lord is looking for people whose heart is completely devoted to Him. And sometimes we just don't realize that we are completely devoted to Him, but it's all about us. And that's not completely devoted to Him. Paul would talk to us about that he's been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Did the Lord find Paul and say, I can use this guy? He absolutely did. Because Paul adopted this perspective. It's not my life. It's not my life here. It's Christ who lives in me. Paul told the Corinthians that he died for all in verse 15, that those who live might live, no longer live for themselves, but for Him, for who their sake died and was raised. I think if we're looking at David, we're seeing a man who is so wholly devoted to God that he doesn't put himself, he doesn't see himself. It's not all about him. It's not about him. It's about what God wants. And he's been anointed to do what God wants. And he is fearless about it. And we're going to see that even when nothing's making any sense, when it's not going the way it ought to be going, it doesn't shake that for him. His perspective is still, I'm here to do what He wants. I trust Him. And it's amazing. It's amazing how he reacts to this. I don't know how sideways my faith might have gotten if I suffered as much devastating, heartbreaking loss is what he does here, and now have to go live on the run and get his parents and go hide them. The things he has to do to stay alive. Man, it would have been so easy to doubt the Lord, and he just doesn't. It took a lot less than that for Saul to not have confidence in the Lord, because he thought it was about him. So this is the difference in their heart. And because of Saul's heart, when David starts thriving, he just can't stand it. He can't stand it, and he ruins it, and he wants David dead, and runs David off, and then chases him for years. A man after God's own heart. I think a lot of it has to do with the way we see, the way we look at things, the way we see ourselves, the way we see others, the way we see God, the way we see our place in this life, the way we see our challenges and our opportunities. Are they for us? Is it all about us? Or is my life dedicated to Him? It's for Him. I want to please Him. That's who David was. The Lord is looking to and fro looking for those whose hearts are completely, wholeheartedly dedicated to him. And that's who we want to be, but it's hard. It's really hard. At least it's really hard for me. I learned that this morning, that sometimes I don't even realize when I'm not looking at it right. So as we keep looking at how David thinks about things, maybe we can keep picking up on ways that we can look at things differently so that our heart is the way God wants it to be, and he can use us the way he wants to, and our life can affect other people the way it's supposed to, and we not be so focused on ourselves. So I don't even know if anybody made comments today. Yeah, David did. David made a couple, but I talked like crazy this morning. Anybody got anything you want to squeeze in here at the last second? I'm not giving you hardly any time to do it, but if you do, I'd love. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Be more of an encouragement to that leader
Yeah.
struggling,
Yeah.
Instead of just
Sure. Sure. Yeah. She's talking about the sadness that the people were starting to scatter when Saul was the anointed king. They shouldn't have been scattering. Rather than scattering, maybe they should have gone to Saul and said, "Hey, don't panic. It's okay. God's got us." But that's not what they did. So anyway, there's where we're at.